I want to. Anything at all, as a subject. It just so happens that I'm talking about exactly the same subject that George talked about last week. Now, George did it in a very mature, sensible, civilised sort of way. This week, maybe a bit less so. I'm talking about the Bible today, and specifically, is the Bible boring? Sorry, I said that a bit wrong. Is the Bible boring? So we're going to think about that. I need help with something. I need some little helpers to do something for me. 2 or 3 little helpers, and maybe 1 or 2 big helpers as well. Come on. I need lots of different help today, but this is the first thing. Does anybody remember, or did anybody used to watch Top Gear? Yes. Does anybody remember the core wall? Yeah? So, it wasn't scientific, but basically these 2 guys thought about a specific car, and they said, is it cool, or is it not cool? Is it seriously uncool, cool, or sub-zero? And we're going to do a similar thing this morning, but we haven't got a core wall. We have, hiding behind here, a boring board. I'm just going to move that out of the way slightly. So, can I have 1 or 2 bigger helpers as well? Come on, somebody. I need you to very carefully unveil the boring board, which is it's just stuck on the blue tack. So just peel it off very carefully, and then some little helps as well. So keep going, and then I need to, that's it, excellent, good, and then I need you to take this boring board, and we'll turn it the right way around, so I need 1 of you to hold one end, it's all a bit chaotic, but it's fine, so you need to go that end, and your dad needs to go the other end. That's it. Right, and then we need to stick this back on. Just stick it down there somewhere. Underneath that one. Yeah. Stick it back up. That's it. Right round here. That's all right. There we are. The boring board. Okay. Now, you little helpers can stay here because I need you. So in my bag here, I have some voting slips. No, you can sit down, thank you. Yeah. So can you give some of those out? Some of those out. Just everybody needs a voting slip. Some of those out. Some of those out. Everybody needs to have one. And you'll note on your voting slip, it's either boring, or interesting. Has everybody got a voting slip? You can have one. Can I have one? People at the back, have you got one? No, not yet. Can you give some out to the people at the back there? Right at the back. Yes. Has everybody got one? Oh, there we are. This one for you. Everybody got one? So we're going to think about various things and whether they are boring or interesting. First one, is the Bible boring? You can hold it for slip for either boring or interesting. And I need a couple of judges to see who's voting for what. What's the verdict, do we think? Do we think it's mainly interesting?
No,
I can't see any borings, can you?
Yeah.
Oh, what? Maybe just one or two. Hang on a minute. Okay, so I think that one can be somewhere. Is it intensely interesting or disinteresting? Intensely interesting. Oh, thank you. So who wants to stick this up on the board? I think it's probably intensely interesting. Right at the beginning there. Intensely interesting. Yeah. Hang on a minute.
I like numbers.
Need some more voting slips over here. Here we are. There's 2 more there. Okay, the next thing we're going to think about are encyclopedias interesting? I happen to have here a very ancient encyclopedia dating from 1905. If I look up what it says about the telephone...
Did you buy it new?
No. This is what it says about the telephone. It says, an instrument for transmitting the human voice or other sounds by means of electricity and telegraph wires. And then it goes on to say at the end here, long-distance lines are also rapidly joining city to city. The longest as yet in existence between the lines, being the lines between New York and Chicago, 1,000 miles. Yeah, so that's 1905. So do we think old encyclopedias are... Well, this was the Google of its day. This is how you found out stuff. Boring or interesting? I think there's some borings. There's some borings, but it's mainly interesting. So, mainly interesting, yeah. Okay, the next thing we're going to think about. Children's storybooks. So, this is just a selection I've just grabbed from around the corner here. Storybooks. Boring or interesting? 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 Oh, boring, Jack? Okay. That's some boring, but mainly interesting. All right. Slightly boring, but mainly interesting. Oh, hang on, you need a doodah, don't you? Yes. There you are. Okay, next one. Maths. I think that's verging towards quite boring. Really? Okay. All right. Another controversial one. Football. What do we think? mainly boring? Mainly boring? What about ballet? Oh, that's about. Do you think it's about half and half? 100% boring.
Agreed.
So at the back there, can't see. Boring. That one's about in the middle, I would say. Fast cars. Oh, that's about half and half as well. Oh, they're interesting down here. Yeah, okay. That's slightly more interesting than boring, that one. Final one, I think I'm going to know the answer to this one. School.
Yeah, what about work? What's about work?
That's slightly boring. Okay. Okay. Thank you for your help. You can go and sit back with your families now. That's really good. Thank you. Okay, this is what Charles Spurgeon said about the Bible 150 years ago. He said, the Bible that's falling apart usually belongs to someone who isn't. That's quite a profound statement, and that says something about the Bible. So, if we take the Bible, this is my own Bible, which I've had for many, many years, in some ways, it's like one of these. It's like an encyclopedia. You know, there's lots of history in this book. There's lots to learn. There's lots to find out. In some ways, it's like one of these. There's lots of stories in it. There's lots of characters. But this book is so much more. There's sort of adventures and battles, and there's drama, and there's stories to read, and there's things to learn. And some bits are a little bit confusing, and some bits are, frankly, a little bit tedious. Some bits are slightly weird. But kind of the more you read it, the more you study it, the more you find, and the more you learn. It's the same with maths. Some of you don't like maths, some of you do like maths. But the more you look at maths, the more you learn about maths. The more you find out about maths. You can do fairly basic GCSE maths, or you can do A-level maths and further maths. You can do a degree in maths. You can do applied maths. You can do maths in nature. You can look at how big infinity is. You can look at where do parallel lines meet, and there are answers to those questions. You can study it and look at different theories and different principles. And the more you look, the more you find. You can make maths your entire life if you want to. If you wanted to, you can study economics and maths, finance and maths, applied maths, analytical maths, geography and maths, music and maths, computing and maths, the logic and philosophy of maths, applied maths, and your whole life can be consumed with maths if you wanted to be. But you still may not find all the answers. There'll be some things that will puzzle you, confuse you, and all the answers aren't there. And kind of the Bible is the same. You can study it, you can look into it, you can accept it and trust it, and you can go so much deeper and discover so much more. Somebody who enjoys maths would probably say maths is not boring. Because they sort of delved deeper and they found out how interesting it is. Maths can be enjoyable, and it's the same with the Bible. This is not just a boring book that sort of gathers dust on a bookshelf. It's often dismissed by people who haven't read it or studied it, but it's also praised as the best book ever. It's so much more than just a reference book or a history book, or a storybook. The Bible can be life transforming. This book has power. It can change people. It's a way of God speaking to us. So, next question. If I was to go out on the high street in Littlehampton, or down on the seafront, and ask people, is the Bible boring? If I asked that to people on the street, what do you think they would say? Can't see your voting sheets? That's all boring as far as I can see. So why is it that us in church think it's intensely interesting, but people out on the street don't see it? Any opinions? They don't see the relevance? Yeah. Don't know Jesus. Haven't read it.
They think it tells them what to do and they don't want to do that.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Okay, so the question is, sorry, George. No revelation from the Holy Spirit. Yeah. So the question is the Bible boring and outdated and irrelevant, or if we study this and live our life with God, is it an adventure? I'm going to tell you about somebody who has crossed the Atlantic Ocean in an 11-metre long inflatable rib.
Not boring.
He circumvented, went round the entire British Isles on a jet ski. He picked the head of a snake on TV and ate the snake. Know who it is yet? He rode naked in a bathtub along the River Thames. He climbed Mount Everest at the age of 23. He held a formal dinner party in a hot air balloon at 25,000 feet. He's wrestled alligators. He's used the corpse of a sheep as a sleeping bag. This is him, Bear Grylls, yeah. And he described the Alpha Course as my greatest adventure. He explored the Christian faith on an Alpha Course, and he takes his faith very seriously. He said, these are his words, Alpha was the best thing I ever did. It helped answer some huge questions and to find a simple, empowering faith in my life. He doesn't find the Christian message boring. So, it comes on to another question I'm going to ask, and I need some other help for this bit as well. Just move that over there. So, how can we trust the Bible? How do we know that how do we know that this book is true, what it says is true? And we're going to do a little sort of impromptu drama for this bit. So again, I need some help. I need to start with an old man. Now, I know we've got a few here, but it needs to be somebody who's very wise and very mature and very sensible. John, I need your help. Go on. Come sit here. Now, this hasn't been rehearsed, hasn't been practiced, so it might all go horribly wrong, but we'll try it anyway. Now, I also need 4 children. Ideally, I need a pair of sisters, and I'm looking in that direction. That's it. You come and sit one side of John. And then I also need a pair of brothers.
You needed.
Pair of brothers. Okay. You can sit that side. Lovely. Now, we're going to tell a little story which is probably familiar to most of you. And it's to do with Narnia. And the Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe.
Yeah, I definitely
if you remember the story, there's a very wise old professor in the story, and there are 4 children. Now, I'll give you, I've got your glasses on, good. I'll give you your words, John. John is the professor. So you're green. And then I need, that's all right, you don't need to say anything, you just need to look handsome. If you can do that. Yep, excellent. Susan, if you can read some orange words. And Peter, you're Peter, if you can read some blue words. And have we got the microphone somewhere? Excellent. So, if you can just hold that for me. The point in the story, where we arrive on the scene, is that 2 of the children have been to Narnia, and they've come back and they've told the rest of the family all about this amazing, fantastic land, far away, with all these amazing things happen. And the other children don't believe them, because it just seems so fantastic, so amazing, you know, it's all made up, load of nonsense, don't believe them. And so they go and see the professor, the wise old professor, to ask his opinion. And so this is where you pick the story up. And I'll sort of, by the way, you're Edmund, although you don't say anything, and you are Lucy, although you don't say anything. You're the one who's been to Narnia. You've been twice, you've been once. Okay? So, we'll pick up the story. So, they went in and knocked at the study door. And the professor said,
"Come in."
And got up and found chairs for them, and he was quite at their disposal. Then he sat listening to them with the tips of his fingers pressed together and never interrupting till they had finished the whole story. After that, he cleared his throat and said the last thing either of them expected.
"How do you know,"
he asked,
"that your sister's story is not true?"
Susan.
But
Began Susan, and then stopped. Anyone could see from the old man's face that he was perfectly serious. Look at that acting. Then Susan pulled herself together and said,
But Edmund said that they had only been pretending.
"That is a point,
said the professor.
which certainly deserves consideration, very careful consideration. For instance, if you'll excuse me for asking the question, does your experience lead you to regard your brother or your sister as the more reliable? I mean, which is the more truthful?"
That's very funny, sir, about it, sir.
Said Peter.
But until we have to say Lucy every time.
Yeah. John.
"And what do you think, my dear?"
Said the professor, turning to Susan.
Well,
Said Susan.
in general, I'd say the same as Peter, but this couldn't be true. All this about the food,
Wood.
and the
Fawn.
fawn.
"That is more than I know.
Said the professor.
And a charge of lying against someone whom you've always found truthful is a very serious thing. A very serious thing indeed."
We were afraid we might even be lying.
Said Susan.
We thought there might be something wrong with Lucy.
"Madness, you mean?"
Said the professor quite coolly.
"Oh, you can make your minds easy about that. One has only to look at her and talk to her to see that she's not mad."
But then,
Said Susan and stopped. She had never dreamed that a grown-up would talk like the professor and didn't know what to think.
"Logic.
Said the professor half to himself.
Why don't they teach logic at these schools? There are only 3 possibilities. Either your sister is telling lies, or she's mad, or she's telling the truth. You know she doesn't tell lies, and it's obvious that she's not mad. For the moment then, and unless any further evidence turns up, we must assume she is telling the truth.
Well done. That's the end of our today. Thank you. You can sit down. Thank you. Okay, so in that little play, the verdict was she telling the truth, or was something wrong with her, or was she deliberately deceiving people? Was she mad? Was she bad? Or was she totally honest and telling the truth and just how it is? The same can be applied to Jesus. It's exactly the same principles. You know, we read in the Bible here about Jesus and all the amazing things that he did and the amazing things he said and how he transformed people's lives. So, was Jesus mad? Was he totally deranged? Was he totally bonkers? Did he belong in an asylum? He didn't know what he was talking about? No. Was he bad? Was he deliberately out to deceive people? Was he a con artist? Was he an imposter? Was he very convincing, but at heart just a liar? Was he someone who just put on a bit of a show to get some attention? No is the answer, just in case you're wondering. If that was the case, it would have been found out as a fraud. If that was the case, people wouldn't have been prepared to die for him and what he said and what he did. So that leaves one alternative. He was neither bad nor mad, and therefore he must have been who he said he was and done what he said he'd done, and he was the Son of God, and he was the truth. So, mad, bad, or God? Lunatic, liar, or Lord? Those are kind of the options, really. So, the teaching of Jesus in this book has lasted for 2,000 years, and it's just transformed countless lives, and it goes on transforming lives day after day after day. Could a con man or a madman really achieve this? No one could find fault with him. Could this really be the case for someone who was deluded or crazy or unbalanced or deceptive? Jesus fulfilled so many of the prophecies we see in this book, in the Old Testament, and these were things that he could not have engineered himself. He couldn't have engineered where or how he was born. He couldn't have engineered where or how he died. They happened because they were part of God's master plan. And Jesus not only affected the lives of the people around him at the time, but he's also carried on affecting the lives of people. His work is still going on and on today. Jesus is still alive and is still active. He still changes lives. Fashions change, telephones change, gadgets and technology changes. Cars become outdated. You can look at a fast car there and think, wow, 20 years' time, it'll be, something else will come along. Society and language moves on, but the message of Jesus, which dates back 2,000 years, is still as relevant now as it was then. Jesus is still alive and still active. What Jesus said in the Bible is still exciting and true and relevant. Does anyone here write a daily diary of what they do every day? Nobody. Oh, one person. Well done. If you look at the book of Luke in the Bible, that was written by a sort of educated doctor. And there are so many references to events and things that were happening at the time and people who were around at the time. And it's sort of almost a diary of events, if you read it that way. And if Luke went to all the effort of writing all this factual information of things that were happening and things that had happened, why would he write in a different way about Jesus? Why would he not accurately record everything that happened about Jesus as well? What Luke has written has been proven to be historically accurate and true. In fact, the entire Bible can be seen to be historically accurate and true. And if we believe that, then this is not just a boring textbook. It's so much more than that. It's not boring. It's of great importance in our lives. It's one thing to read about somebody in a book. We can read about Jesus, we can read about other characters, but it's entirely different thing to know someone well, to communicate with them, to understand them, for them to have an impact on your life. The Bible is not an encyclopedia, it's not a textbook, it's not a history book, it's not a storybook. It's something that teaches us and enriches us and brings us closer to a relationship with Jesus. It can help us to know Jesus more. Jesus came that we would have life, and have life to the full. This is John 10 verse 10. This is the message. It says, I came so they can have real and eternal life, more and better life than they ever dreamed of. That doesn't sound boring to me. Jesus doesn't want us to have boring lives. He wants us to enjoy life within the limits of his boundaries and his rules. Does anybody enjoy the game of football? Anybody enjoy playing football? Yeah? Does anybody want to come and play football with me now? Come on, Jack. You can go up. Yeah? He's injured, is he? Okay, somebody else? Somebody else?
No, I don't play football.
Okay, you come play football with me. All right. Okay. You can have the ball. Now, if we're playing a game of football, and I was to come up to you, and I was to take the ball and run off with it like that, is that allowed? Is that within the rules? No. Okay. If I was playing football with you and I scored a goal, could I say that's the end of the game, I won? No? No? Why not?
Rules.
There are rules, yes. If I was to come along and push you out the way so I can have the ball, would I be allowed to do that? No. No, why not? Because it's not in the rules. The rules say you can't do it. Okay, thank you for your help. That's really good. Thank you. Thank you. In the game of football, there are 17 basic laws of football. And if you obey all those rules, and those are just the sort of headlines, there are pages and pages and pages and pages of rules to enjoy the game of football. If you obey all those rules, you can play the game well, and apparently it is a beautiful game. Apparently. But the players need to know what the rules are. If the rules are broken, there are consequences. A chap I know used to play football at the very, very highest level, internationally and top of the league. His record for getting a yellow card was 3 seconds into a game. That's some going. Blow the whistle, yellow card. Quick as that. And he got a yellow card because he broke the rules. You can't carry on playing the game until you win. You can't knock people over and run off with the ball. You can't make up the rules as you go along and say to yourself, I think I know a better way this game can be played. I'm going to play it my way. It doesn't work like that. If you think of a society without rules and without laws, it would be mayhem. And it's the same with God. He sets out the way He expects us to live and wants us to live our lives within those boundaries, within those rules. So yes, there are rules in here, but it's for our own good that we have to live our life by them. And if we don't, there are consequences. It doesn't mean that living our life God's way is boring. People kind of have a sort of natural tendency to be naughty and disobedient and do things their own way and live by their own rules. They don't have to be taught to do things like that, but the Bible sets out how we should live with respect for God and for the people that we live with. God longs for us to have power, together with all the saints, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of God. That's from Ephesians 3:18. And the love of Christ is big enough to reach every person in the world. It reaches across every country, in every continent, to every person of every race, every colour, every tribe, every background. It's long enough to last throughout a lifetime and beyond into eternity. It's deep enough to reach us however far we think we have fallen. It's high enough to lift us into the heavenly places. God's love for us is amazing and transformational and available to everyone. I don't call that boring. I was looking on the BBC website this week, and they had some book reviews on there. And Hugh Fernie Whittingstall did a review of a book called How to Read Water. It's effectively a textbook about how to look at water and understand what it does and how it moves. And he said about this book, "This is a beautiful book. It's just a wonderful read. It's one of those books that gives you a new pair of eyes to see the world in a different way." And Mel Goodroich, the comedian, chose a novel called The Magic Mountain. And she says, "This book will change your life. It will change the way you see everything." I'm going to say that outright. It's extraordinary. It's unputdownable. Some of it is quite complicated, I'm not going to lie. And then somebody else said about a different book, "This book is kind of transformative, and I think it would be for absolutely anyone reading it." Now, I can say those three things about this book. You know, it's a beautiful book, it's a wonderful read, it's one of those books that gives you a new pair of eyes to see the world in a different way. I can say this book will change your life, it will change the way you see everything. It's extraordinary, it's unputdownable. Some of it's quite complicated, I'm not going to lie. And I could also say, this book is transformative, and I think it would be for absolutely anyone reading it. And yet they said that about a textbook and a novel. Go figure. So, what should we be telling people about this book? How would we do a book review of this book? What would we say in a sort of paragraph or a line or two to explain how amazing this book is, how life-transforming this book is? I'll leave you to ponder on that one. Now, in my bag here, I have a slightly random book. This book is called Evacuation, and is written by someone called Leslie E. Roussel. And it tells the story of the German occupation of Guernsey in the Second World War. Now, I don't particularly have an interest in the occupation of Guernsey in the Second World War. I don't particularly have an interest in the Second World War generally, or the island of Guernsey particularly. But this book is quite special to me. Why is it quite special to me? Because I knew Leslie E. Roussel. Leslie E. Roussel was my next door neighbour when I was growing up. And this is his story. In the front here, it's got my name written. There it is. And he signed it in 1980, when I was quite young. So this book is special to me because I knew the author. When I read it, it becomes more personal to me because it's his story. I knew the guy who wrote this. I've got a picture of him in my head. I knew what his interests were. I knew who he was married to. I remember going around to his front room and watching TV. I remember him coming around to our house. You know, I knew what his interests were. I knew what made him tick. And so this book is quite personal to me. And when I read it, it sort of brings things to life a bit more. And when you know the author of a book, it makes it so much more interesting and personal. It sort of adds an extra dimension. You can understand it because it becomes more personal, more interesting, more relevant. It gives you a deeper understanding. Same with this book. When you know the author, when you have a relationship with the author, when you know who wrote it, it becomes so much more personal. Okay, so here's the challenge, just to wrap up. Are you one of those people who think Bible is boring, or Jesus is boring, or Christianity is boring? Is it boring when someone loves you with a never-failing, everlasting, eternal love? Is it boring when someone cares for you so much that they're prepared to die in your place? Is it boring when events that happened 2,000 years ago are still relevant today? Is it boring when lives can be transformed because of the love of God? As I said earlier, learning about God is like maths. The deeper you go, the more you find out, the more interesting it becomes. You can stick with the simple stuff if you want to, that's fine. It's fine for some people, that's all they need to know. But the more you investigate, the more you study, the more you look into it, the more time you spend with it, the more interesting it becomes, and the more life-changing it becomes. So the challenge is, are you prepared to go deeper, to find out more, to spend more time with God, to let God have more of an impact in your life? Or are you going to just disregard this book as something that's boring and irrelevant and belongs on a shelf covered with dust? Is it boring or is it not? That's really the question. What I would say, if you want to read more of the Bible and you don't have a Bible at home, then come and speak to us and we will get the Bible for you. You can put your name in it, it can be yours, you can read it, you can study it, you can learn from it, you can live by it.